I told the others. They didn't believe me. You're all doomed. You're all doomed. Hello, huge movie fanatic Nate, stopping on by, continuing my reviews of the Friday the 13th films. I'm coming at you today to review Friday the 13th, Part 2. The Body Count continues. So obviously after the huge financial success of the first film, unfortunately, seeing as how money is kind of only thing that anyone really cares about, they wanted to make more of it. They instantly put out, as soon as they could, the following year, the sequel, Friday the 13th Part 2, which begins, as we all know, with the dream sequence of the only surviving character from the first movie, Alice, played by Adrienne King. Reprises her role rather as Alice in an opening kind of scene where she's going off and on, is kind of dreaming, and she's having a nightmare about the end of Part 1. We see, flashbacks or scenes from the end of Part 1. Kind of highlights from the end of Part 1, if you will, and, character Alice wakes up and, she's clearly, having a hard time dealing with it, post-traumatic stress, all this kind of stuff. Unfortunately, it's kind of a bummer in a way that, the Alice character dies at the beginning, but in a way I kind of think it's kind of cool. Obviously with the killer, being beheaded at the end of the original film, the filmmaker, the studio was just like, screw it, we'll just have, Jason, although Jason's supposed to be dead, we'll say, nah, he didn't die. She just thought he died. So what's ironic about the sequels to Friday the 13th is that it's just kind of goofy because she didn't really have to be killing in the first movie because her kid never did die. So it's just like, I don't know. I mean, obviously the logic is really, really bad for the fact that he didn't die, because if he didn't die, why didn't he go to her or come out of the woods or whatever? So I mean, it's not about logic, it's about money, and they want more of it, so they're just, they didn't expect this series to go on probably for as long as it did, so they're just like, let's just do a money grab. We'll just say, just as a cool twist, that Jason didn't drown and was living in the woods ever since. So, whatever. I mean, as a horror movie fan, I don't really care about the inconsistencies or the fact that it just doesn't really make sense or whatever. You just kind of go with it, So unfortunately, at the beginning of this movie, Jason does basically get his revenge by, putting. So at the beginning of this movie is only like, I think, supposed to have taken place only mere weeks after the events of the first movie, because Mrs. Voorhees' head is still in relatively good shape. That's because it was in the fridge, I guess. But Alice, after this rather slow kind of extended opening scene with her just walking around and trying to take a shower and answering the phone and all this kind of stuff, she goes to the window and a cat jumps through and the false scare, only to open the fridge and see the real scare, which is, the head that she chopped off of Mrs. Voorhees. Imagine how scary that'd be. I mean, she's already has PTSD, and actually opening the fridge and seeing the head of the woman she killed in the fridge is just like, oh man. But I mean, one could say that the beginning of this movie, by killing the survivor of the first movie, is kind of lame, but in a way it is kind of Jason it's kind of a fitting beginning for the sequel in a lot of ways. Jason starts out the movie by getting his ultimate revenge on the woman who killed his mom. I mean, if you look at it that way, it's kind of a cool way to begin, as much as I'd like to see like a whole second, sequel take place with the character of Alice. But at the same time, it's just kind of like, well, what would she do? She'd just be all just affected and traumatized from the events in the first movie. She'd just be kind of like Laurie Strode in the sequel to Halloween. So you might as well just frickin' kill her and be done with it. And I mean, obviously their plan with the second movie was basically to do a pretty much a more or less of a remake of the first movie, where you have a whole fresh new group of counselors, in this case like counselors going to a counselor training center. But having her dispatched, I thought ultimately, whatever, it works by having Jason kill the killer of his mom. It's kind of the ultimate revenge, and thus we can then we can start off with a fresh group of kids. And as I was saying, it's so much of a rehash of. I'm not giving this movie a bad time. I'm just saying the facts that I watched it recently, rewatched this movie recently, and I'm like, gosh, even it is so much of a rehash of the movie, even down to like the truck of, you know, two guys and a girl driving to the spot. It's just like, oh my gosh. But I don't give the movie a hard time with that. I grew up with these movies, so to me they're each individually their own thing, and you love each one for its own merits or whatever. I will say that, you know, I do really, and I wish they almost wished they would have done this in more sequels. I love the idea of the second movie taking place at the Counselor Training Center, which is on, you know, it's not the same lake that the first movie was filmed on, but for all intents and purposes in the movie, they're on Crystal Lake. They're basically on the other side of the lake that, you know, away from the camp or whatever. And there's actually, you know, they make sure to tell the kids and, you know, the counselors that they're training to stay away. You know, it's condemned. Don't go over to the camp. It's forbidden or whatever. You got to keep out of there. So, you know, I love the idea. And like I say, I wish they would have done it in more sequels, but I guess they already did it in this one, so to do it again would be kind of rehash. But I love the idea of the Counselor Training Center. I think that's a perfect idea for a location to the sequel of Friday the 13th, to be honest, because now you have nubile young frickin', you know, victims ready to be killed or whatever. So obviously the premise of this movie is Jason didn't in fact drown, you know, as a boy, as his mom thought. He lived, and I don't know what. I mean, I don't think we're supposed to think too much about, you know, how he survived or whatever. But he ended up, you know, ending up living out in the woods and creating his own ramshackle kind of a shack, and now he's basically carrying on after getting revenge on the woman who killed his mom. He's basically carrying on his good work, if you will, and killing counselors, or even counselors in training, I guess, by the way this movie plays. Just like with the first movie, I absolutely love the place where they filmed this movie, which was a real location. Unfortunately, it has since been demolished, like the buildings and stuff, which I regard as an absolute and complete and total shame and travesty. But this place was a real place on a real lake. So, you know, this movie, very much like with the first one, has the really great realism, you know, feeling of a real kind of location in the country, and a kind of a little bit of a rustic feel, and just a camp. Even though this isn't a camp, it's still the buildings and the cabins and stuff still have this rustic kind of camp-ish feel, and obviously being on the lake is an absolutely fantastic location. I don't like this location nearly as much as the location for the first movie, but it's a close second. I really do like the location that this movie takes place at, with the Counselor Training Center. And one thing that I want to say is that, like, the days are all, it's like the days are all so beautiful. I mean, I just love summer myself, and all the days photography in this movie are all beautiful blue sky, sunny days, green leaves in the woods. It's just like they lucked out like no one's business when they filmed the day scenes in this movie, because I think like every freaking shot, you know, of the sky is just nothing but blue, and it's just sunny, and this movie really captures the feeling of summer, and, you know, freaking nice beautiful summer days out in the country, and just really, oh my gosh, really lucked out with their day photography. It's just so beautiful. Obviously, much kind of like the first movie, they continue and kind of up the ante in the kind of the nubile women aspect. You've got this girl who plays Terry, who is absolutely, you know, probably loved by male fans, well, probably female fans as well, just loved by fans in general. But she's kind of almost introduced in as, you know, not introduced with the butt shot, but might as well have been introduced with the butt shot. And the butt shot still, even now, is really a fantastic butt shot. And she's in general just, you could tell she was like that girl was like real, like athletic in real life, and just like so much so that her acting is kind of, you could tell she was kind of hired for her looks and her body, and not so much for her acting, because her acting leaves a little bit to be desired. But hell, with a body like that, who the hell cares? Obviously, I think that this movie, although being inferior, of course, to the original movie, the first Friday the 13th I regard as my favorite Friday the 13th of all. I think this movie does improve on some things, being kind of like the eye candy, if you will. Having just spoken about the character of Terry, and then you've got the character of Sandra, played by a young, whatever the hell her name was, Marta Koblar, who did seem to go missing for a while, but she's kind of been found. Apparently, she's going to be making an appearance at a convention this year, I think. So Marta, all is well. Marta Koblar is not dead. For a while there, it seemed like people didn't know what the hell happened to her, if she died or what. But apparently, she's not dead. Still, that probably doesn't, obviously look anything like she does in this movie. But at least they got her on film when she was young. But for me, being a teenager and stuff, and even still now, she's Marta Koblar, however the hell you say her last name, is really something to look at in this movie. Now, I'm still wondering to this day, is she natural, you guys think, or is she enhanced? I would lean towards enhanced personally, but there can be some pert boobies, I guess, as well. But yeah, regardless, either way, she's definitely attractive in this movie, and I think a lot of guys and probably girls alike are kind of bummed that we never got to see her tatas, unfortunately. But whatever, you get to see them, poking out through that T-shirt she wears close to her death or whatever. So so this movie, although it falls short for me, compared to the first one, it does improve on some things, namely just the eye candy, the female eye candy, and stuff like that. So that's something that should be said. One thing that this movie shows, it's difference for me than the first movie, is it kind of shows a little more of, like, I don't know, more of a traditional take on a movie, in particular in terms of the cinematography, whereas the first movie, and something I didn't mention in my review of the first movie, is it doesn't really take a traditional cinematography approach, something that I really appreciated being a fan of Stanley Kubrick and his kind of way he has his movies lit. This movie takes much more of a classic kind of or a more traditional cinematography approach with like the side light or the top lighting on people's heads and all this kind of stuff. So that kind of gives this movie, I guess it's I don't know, one could say a little bit more of a technically a sophistication compared to the first movie. Although I wouldn't, like I say, I guess we'll just say it's different and compared to the first movie really stands out in that regard, where that movie really has a fantastic, minimalistic, and I should have said it in the review of that movie, but I'm saying it now. The first movie has this really fantastic, minimalistic approach to the cinematography, which I really, really, really loved, and one of the bazillion of things that I love so much about that first movie. So this movie, to me, the traditional kind of the cinematography with the lighting and the top light and the side light or whatever, whatever they call this kind of light here, the accent light or whatever, kind of after having the more traditional, or not traditional, but the subtle lighting of the first movie and natural lighting of the first movie, I kind of, to me that's a little bit of a, bummer, but whatever. I still like how the night's lit, and in particular that campfire scene and stuff like that. It just should be. This is something that I've always noticed recently. When I past decade or more since I've been watching the movie, where this movie plays visually a lot more kind of whatever we can just say studio-like, or corporate, or just traditional cinematography. And one of the scenes that's one of my favorite scenes in this movie is the freaking campfire scene. How cool is that? It's not only just lit and just executed so fantastically with the slow push-in on Paul telling the story, but they're using this opportunity, or using this campfire or scary campfire story to fill the audience in on what's happened, or what happened with Jason. Or what's funny is they use it in a way that Paul just says it as just kind of a urban legend, or just a non-true tale. But what's ironic is, a little bit unbeknownst to them, this scary quote-unquote untrue urban legend that he's saying is actually basically the truth, and would come to haunt them later on, which is really cool. But how cool is the freaking campfire scene, and the slow pushing, and just the dialogue written for that scene is so great. And the scene, like I said, is a way to clue in the audience as how Jason may have survived and, you know, maintained himself over the years in the woods up until the point, obviously, of this movie and the events taking place. But it's just cool seeing the characters' reactions, and just like, oh, you know, and all the scary things that Paul says. And of course it leads to the end crescendo of the scene, where it's just like, you know, what's his name, is it yeah, Ted comes jumping out of the darkness wearing a mask and a frickin' got a spear or whatever, and scares everyone. And it's just like, oh man, how cool is that? It'd be interesting to like have some video footage from the theater and the opening weekend and see how many people actually jumped when Ted came into the shot, you know, wearing that mask, because it's kind of creepy. Obviously, I don't think it ever scared me, but it's kind of a creepy shot when Ted, that mask comes in the shot, and it's like, and all the frickin', you know, counselors in training, you know, scatter, and poor Mark has to try to wheel away as fast as he can. But yeah, that's definitely a huge standout scene in this movie for me. So basically, I don't know, sometime in the last half of the movie or whatever, the big, you know, I'd say the majority, or half, maybe we'll say half of the, you know, the counselors in training or whatever, get in a pickup truck and ride very dangerously in the back of a pickup truck to a bar. Not that they care about their, anyway, well-being, because they're going to go get drunk anyway. But what's ironic is these people all probably live, these people that go to a bar to drink, they all hop in the back of the truck and, you know, go to a bar, and they all, unbeknownst to them, that saves all their lives. But that leaves, you know, basically the rest of the people who are left behind at the counselor training center to die. And actually the kind of the two leads, the Amy Steele character, Ginny, and then the Paul, played by whatever the hell his name is, go to the bar as well. So, but so that kind of, so that just leaves the counselors in training, to kind of, the lambs, if you will, to, you know, leaves them behind to be slaughtered by, well, Jason's not a wolf, but whatever, you know what I'm saying. It kind of leaves the counselors in training behind to be slaughtered one by one. And what's kind of cool is the way it's done, to be honest. I mean, I'm not going to say it, you know, a lot of this, I love, what the hell's his name? What the hell's that one guy's name? Oh, Scott. Yeah, I think he's like is he one of the first to go? Possibly. Scott actually gets trapped in what I guess we're supposed to assume is one of Paul's bear traps or animal traps, is rope that's on the ground that if you step in it, it, you know, hoists you up upside down. So Scott gets, you know, he's playing a prank on Terry, and she's taking the skinny dip at night, and he basically steals her clothes. And just what an asshole, you know. You're not going to get her affections by doing this kind of stuff, jerk. But whatever, he dies too soon to be able to realize that. So he gets roped up, you know, from his foot, hung upside down by Paul's contraption or whatever, and Terry goes away to get a knife to cut him down, and while she's going to get a knife to cut him down, Jason shows up to cut him up. So unfortunately, in a scene that is probably heavily butchered by the MPAA, I always loved how he took the machete with this goofy backwards blade or whatever, and he grabs his head and slits his throat. And you do see a little bit of blood start to come out, but unfortunately it cuts right away. But you know, I said it 25 years ago when me and my buddy reviewed the Friday the 13th movies. Up until then, there were only 8. But as I love that death, I always thought that death was really cool, because like Paul does half of it, and then Jason finishes the job. Although Paul didn't probably mean him to die, but that's just kind of funny. Speaking of kills, now that we're finally to the point of the movie where a lot of the bloodthirsty viewers went to the movie to see, when people start being dispatched. I mean, Mark's death, he's the guy in the wheelchair. I don't know, you know, it's kind of weird that I wonder why they even did this character, to be honest, but I'm glad they did, because it was kind of cool, a little bit of a different thing in the movie, having this guy in a wheelchair, this kind of former jock or whatever, and it's kind of does make you wonder, you know, he says he's in training, and she's, you know, was it Vicky? She's like, for what? And I don't know if he's maybe he's an arm wrestle competition guy or something like that. But what I was trying to say and getting very sidetracked is Mark's death is probably my favorite in this movie, and probably one of my favorite in the entire franchise. This poor guy being in a wheelchair, wheels out onto the, the whatever, the deck of the outside of the building, thinking that I guess thinking that the thunderstorm, the rainstorm is Vicky. Just him and Vicky are about to hook up at this point, so he's kind of anxious, probably waiting for her return, and in a scene that I think is kind of faultily done in the sense that we show a push-in on the back of his head, and then we show him from the front in a push-in on the back. I don't know if it makes absolutely no sense. I don't know if it's supposed to be some kind of, I guess, misdirection, because then obviously the machete comes from just like the side, and it's just one of the most. The reason I love this kill so much is because it's just so ridiculous, in particular with the push-in on the back of his head, and then his front reaction, and then the back, and then it's just like, well, nothing can be sneaking up on him from behind, because we see that there's nothing behind him when we see the front of his face. So it makes absolutely no sense. But then the kind of what we probably didn't expect is a blade to just come from the side and just smash his face, and then he goes rolling down the frickin' stairs. So that's just like, oh my god. And actually, when they did the intro of New Blood, they actually kind of refolied his wheelchair going down the steps, and it actually sounds more cool than it does in the original movie, which is kind of cool. But Mark's death, man, it's probably my all-time favorite kill in Friday the 13th Part 2, and like I say, one of my favorite in the entire franchise. You gotta love that. So as we all know, after all the mayhem and the counselors in training are dispatched, you've got what's their names? Sandra and Jeff dispatched. It's kind of like I think that's like the first twofer in a Friday 13th, and I don't think that generally happens very often. Maybe not even again. Don't quote me, but it's not. If it does happen again, it's not something that's very. I don't think it does happen again, where Jason actually offs two characters at once, because Sandra and Jeff are on top of Jeff is on top of Sandra after just having recently made a little love, and then Jason comes in the room, of course, with the spear and goes right through both of them. So that's, like I say, one of probably the only twofers in possibly the entire franchise. But before I end the review, obviously I should comment on Jason and the potato sack or whatever, pillowcase, whatever. We'll just say the sack over the head look, which is a look that, in the spring of, what the hell was it, 1992, me and a buddy were really, really crazy about Part 2, and we were really loving the sack on the head look. And still now, I think that it's almost a shame in a way that they didn't do more. Well, I guess maybe one sack on the head Jason is good, but it should be said that his look in this movie is kind of cool, with the kind of the overalls or coveralls, whatever the hell he's wearing, and the sack on the head tied up by the rope with the one eye thing. And the look, I think, is really, really, really cool. I don't really like the look of Jason actually when he comes to the window at the end. I don't think he should have had any hair, because obviously the design of him as a child in the first movie had no hair. So I think that the decision to have all kinds of hair on the kind of non-deformed side of his head, I thought was the wrong choice. But I like the sack head. We only see that look of him just for a few seconds at the very end, but the sack head look of Jason I always thought was really cool, and I really liked. And after Paul is presumably killed, when they come back from the bar, and it's this kind of Ginny versus Jason, if you will, that bit is always really cool. And Jason's weapon of choice kind of for a while there being the pitchfork, until he breaks it in half and stuff. And then of course the whole bit about this movie that I think is really cool is Jason's kind of, ramshackle shack in the woods, and the thing that we see, the cops see, but we don't see until the very end, which is absolutely iconic. One of the coolest things about this movie is the shrine they have Jason made in his ramshackle shack, of the shrine to his mom, with the sweater and the severed head there and the candles and stuff, is really, 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 really cool. Always something I thought was really cool. And the thing they really do with it, where they have Ginny, put the sweater on and kind of pretend to be his mom to try to talk him out of killing her, I thought was a really cool thing. And she was actually going to slice him with the machete, which is almost kind of cruel if you think about it. But to be fair, Jason just killed everyone and was trying to kill her, so I guess it's self-defense. But That was really cool to have, you know, Jason just at the last moment see that the head is, you know, still behind her and that's not her, and you know, that was a cool, you know, the ending in the cabin in Jason's ramshackle shack is I always thought was really cool, and then Paul comes to the rescue and stuff. It was really cool, and I do have to admit the thing that I don't really like about the end of this movie is everything after that, you know, kind of going back to the cabin and trying to do one more scare and kind of basically trying to achieve or copy or mimic the jump scare with Jason coming out of the water at the end of the first movie by having him come through the window. Just you know, having Muffin, you know, appear at the door and just like, oh, everything's okay, and then Jason comes through the window. Although it's probably a, you know, probably as startling as I would imagine it was, as a startling scare as the first movie. You know, it was probably a startling scare, but I just think that, I don't know, it just, I guess it didn't work as well for me as the original movie, but whatever. I mean, that's just a small portion of the overall movie. So my starage for Friday the 13th Part 2 will probably be, we'll go 3.5 stars out of 4 stars, just because it does capture a really, really good feel of summer. Even though it's not a summer camp, it's like a summer, you know, it's a counselor training center. It captures the season of summer at a country, you know, in the woods in a lake environment fantastically well, with all those beautiful sunny days. And, you know, you got a little more nubile, a little more eye candy, you know, female eye candy in this movie to look at. And oh, Crazy Ralph actually makes an appearance back and is dispatched. And you know, having watched it recently, I'm kind of like, you know, maybe they killed Ralph too soon. Maybe he should have, you know, hung around and been in more sequels. But I mean, at that time, who knows? They probably didn't think they'd necessarily do another one after that. But that's my review of Friday the 13th Part 2, a movie that I, you know, hold in still in its own right in really high regard. I mean, I like this movie very much as well, obviously, as demonstrated by my star rating. So thank you very much for watching this review, and as always, we'll catch you next time.